In this video, I want to begin simplifying radical expressions. We'll be using the product property for square roots. All our radicals today will be square roots. And the product property says, under the right conditions, that I can change my point of view. That is, the square root of a product can be rewritten as the product of the square roots. Now this only works for multiplication, and there's an equivalent idea for division. It doesn't work for adding and subtracting. Here's an example of what we're going to work on. If I'm given the square root of 12, I need to try to find within 12 factors which might be perfect squares. For instance, thinking of 12 as 4 times 3 is helpful because by the product property, I can rewrite that square root of a product as the product of the square roots, and then square root of 4 can be simplified to 2. We usually write the multiplication this way. That is, it's 2 times root 3, and we write it like this. And even though we don't see an operator, there's an implied multiplication. Now, some of you might have thought, yes, but when I looked at 12, I thought of 2 and 6. And that's fine. That is a factorization. The problem with that factorization is, once we use the product property, we can't simplify any further. Square root of 2 is irrational. Square root of 6 is irrational. We can't rewrite them in a simpler form. We could with square root of 4 being rewritten as a 2. So if you end up with a factorization like this, it's not that all hope is lost. Because notice if I continued and said to myself, well, that 6 isn't really helpful, but if I continued to factor 6, oh, I see. I have 2 2's and a 3, and maybe you'd recognize the 2 2's as a 4, and then you could just continue in the same way. See if you can figure out how to simplify this square root. Hopefully the factorization, 9 and 2, popped into your head. Using the product property, I can rewrite the square root of the product as the product of the square roots. And square root of 9 is 3, and I get 3 times square root of 2. Here's another one. In this case, the factorization that's helpful is 25 and 3. And after using the product property, I can rewrite the final version as 5 times the square root of 3. How about this one? You may have noticed that 32 is 16 and 2, in which case you can go right through to the answer. But some of you may have thought of 32 as 4 and 8. Now that's not wrong. You can continue with the product property and simplify. But notice these aren't the same. And the reason they aren't is you now have to continue and recognize that square root of 8 can itself be written as 4 times 2. And then we continue with the product property, and now we have 2 factors of 2, which gives us 4 square roots of 2. Now they are the same, but it took us a lot more steps to get there. See if you can figure out what to do with this factor in the front. If I think of 18 as 9 times 2 and use the product property, I can end up with the product of 5 and 3 being 15. Here's another one. Using the factorization 4 and 5, again 2 and 10 isn't helpful. I can use the product property, and after multiplying, get my final result. Well, that's our introduction to using the product property. In the next video, we're going to practice simplifying square roots like this using prime factorization.